The lower Minnesota River watershed is directly south of the Twin Cities Metro. Prior Lake is in the northeast of this watershed. The strongest forces acting within Prior Lake are the homeowners and their HOAs.
This has led to the hyper-privatization of the lake, creating unequal access to a publicly managed lake and heavily polluting the water in it that enters from Spring Lake before it flows out to the Minnesota River and then eventually to the Mississippi.
Our intervention leverages a series of incentive structures to obtain land to start to break up the privatized fabric of the lake. Creating funding for the DNR will help actually manage the lake shores to make sure laws are being followed. Offering restoration and trade for projects will allocate land for restoration in exchange for small projects for homeowners on the lake. Publicly funding the restoration and not requiring homeowners to manage endangered species will help expand the restoration. Creating tax incentives for the donation of conservation easements and land and public benefit ratings for restoration projects will help to break up wealthy landowners' properties. Implementing community conservation programs will allow neighbors and neighborhoods to collaborate on restoration projects and promote a restorative culture across the lake.
The typical lawn construction of private property dramatically increases the runoff entering the lake. The runoff becomes polluted from the lawn and washes excess sediment from the shoreline into the lake. Introducing native pieces of shoreline allows for more infiltration, which reduces runoff. The increased infiltration helps remove pesticides and slows down the water entering the lake. Deep root systems help hold lake shore intact. The pieces of restored shoreline become safe havens for native fauna that rely on natural ecosystems to access the lake safely. Repairing shoreline ecosystems has a spillover effect that will help the restoration projects to slowly enter the lake and begin to repair the damaged lake bed. This will provide safe harbors for natural systems to fight against pollution and ensure long-term use of the lake beyond simply boating.
Zooming out, you can see how this starts to create a deprivatized lakeshore across the entire water body. Rezoning open properties for natural conservation and establishing lake management district will stop the increasing scale of privatization and provide funding for the DNR to help enforce conservation laws that already exist. Many lakeshore homeowners would love to add small developments closer to the lake. Publicly funding restoration projects and not requiring homeowners to manage endangered species on site will help proliferate small restoration projects across the lake. Wealthy homeowners, in some cases, would gladly grant conservation easements for land they already can't build on for tax incentives based on the size and public benefit of the donation. Secondary and tertiary homeowners may be willing to donate their entire plot of land in exchange for tax benefits and a plot of land slightly farther away from the lake. Creating ecologically conscious public housing projects on the open land will further break up the private fabric of the shoreline.
Here you can see how this same effect can be applied to a different part of the watershed. Here there already exists a degree of separation between parts of the privatized fabric of the lake and the lake itself. Obtaining this land for natural restoration would be fairly straightforward. Restoration and trade for projects will allow for large portions of pieces of land to be donated, breaking up the typical lawn typologies on the lake. As houses start to get moved away from the shoreline into further recessed plots of land, large plots can be recreated that will then be rezoned for natural conservation. With amplifying public use of the lake as part of the new zoning classification, camp-style housing can be constructed and improve regular public access. The public use of the lake through reclamation of the shoreline allows for an increased public access, which in turn creates increased public interest as a stakeholder in the long-term health of the lake.
Pathways down to the lakefront that interact with the native vegetation visually connect the restored shoreline to public access and bring the public into direct contact with the water body.
This configuration rectifies the balance between public entities like the DNR and private groups in the lake.
There are several different trajectories this project could take across the watershed. The first and most impactful way in which this project could expand is where the trend of deprivatization becomes so widespread that there is now a buffer zone around the water bodies. A more pared down version of this intervention starts to break up pieces of the privatized shoreline and creates areas of natural relief along the impaired water bodies. The least effective version of this intervention would be one where point interventions are made in larger pieces of undeveloped land and key points around the water bodies.